Okay, now we're going to finish up 19th century Japan, really talking about, we're going to be talking about Japanese foreign policy. Now keep in mind, Japanese foreign policy by the end of the 19th century is going to get very aggressive. And it's going to lead to a very aggressive foreign policy in the 20th century as well. And of course, we all know what's going to happen with World War II. Now, this doesn't come out of the blue. This doesn't come out of nowhere. You know, you could probably even go about 100 years before in the late Tokugawa period. And in the late Tokugawa period, they were talking about reviving the military. Let's go show other people who are not Japanese how awesome we are. Now, keep in mind, they had been many, many years in seclusion, and maybe they're just tired of fighting themselves. And at the same time, in the 19th century, the Europeans, and arguably even the Americans, they're going to different places around the globe and they're flexing their muscle. Now, this is going to be called New Imperialism, and we're going to talk about New Imperialism in a couple days. So they're going on flexing. Now, keep in mind, the Japanese in the 19th century, they're adopting a lot of the ideas of the Europeans, of the Americans. So it is only natural that if you're copying somebody who is militarily aggressive, who is imperialistic, who is willing to go down and take over some areas, and you're emulating those guys, well, of course, what are you going to do? You're going to start emulating those guys as well. Although there are numerous reasons for 19th century imperialism, one of the big ones is the idea of social Darwinism. Now, we talked about social Darwinism a little bit last unit in the context of Charles Darwin with evolution. Well, Herbert Spencer takes the idea of Darwin's theory of evolution, animals gaining a slight advantage over other animals to be more fitted for their environment. They win, the people who don't lose. They apply that from animals to nations, to empires, to cultures. They're saying that there are many, many cultures around the globe. There are many nations, empires, kingdoms, whatever, around the globe. And they're not equal. Okay? It is survival of the fittest. You need to go take those areas over and enforce your culture. The superior culture will win. I guess if we will make it a little bit more extreme, a little bit more barbaric, it's kill or be killed. And that's the ideology of the 19th century. The Europeans are practicing it. They're going through Africa, they're going through Asia, saying, you do our culture. Well, the Japanese are starting to do the same thing. It's like we should be going to other areas and we should be implementing our ways of doing things in other areas. Now, the first area to feel, I guess, the flying elbow of Japanese imperialism is going to be Korea. Keep in mind, Korea is Korea. Korea has always been pretty submissive, but they've always been pretty submissive to China because they were always a part of that Chinese tributary system. The Japanese start looking at Korea, the same way the Europeans are looking at China or other areas of the world. The Japanese are saying, we're industrializing, we're getting stronger. Korea, I'm looking at you, pal. You need to open up your markets. We need to be able to trade our goods in your area. You need to let us. And if you don't let us, we'll just force you to anyway. And you're going to like it. Hey, we also want to say in your government. We want diplomats to be making some decisions in your government to help you out. Really, to help us out. So we're going to see that the Japanese are really using the European handbook at this point. That's about the 1880s. Give it about 1890. Now, the argument gets a little bit more persuasive for the Japanese. It's not only now, hey, it would be nice to kind of have a market in Korea, be able to dump a lot of goods, make us richer. That's one argument, but now the argument is, if we don't do this now, well, then the Russians will have the inside track and they'll dominate Korea. When we could have easily done that, or the British will dominate it. When we could have easily done that. So, of course, naturally, we're going to see Japanese aggression. Now, there's going to be a consequence to that. When the Japanese go into Korea to start flexing their muscle, it is going to provoke a response by the Chinese. The Chinese are going to go, whoa, 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 whoa. That's ours. That's always been ours. It's been a part of the the Chinese tributary system. You leave Korea alone. And of course, Japan politely responds, no. So of course, 1894 to 1895, we have what's called the Sino-Japanese War. Now with the Sino-Japanese War, I hesitate to even call this a war because that implies like two people are actually fighting. This is a beatdown. And it's a beatdown not because the Chinese people aren't brave, all right? It's just that you have the Japanese with a modern industrial army versus a non-industrial army. It's a beatdown. It's what the Europeans have been doing to the Chinese already. Or maybe specifically what the British were doing to the Chinese earlier in like the Opium Wars. So it's a beatdown, and of course, Japan's going to get their goodie bag. Japan is going to force Korea to open up ports. Japan will now have diplomats in Korea. Japan gets Taiwan from China, which opens up a whole big can of worms with Taiwan. Taiwan's always center of controversy. Okay? So they're going to get all of this stuff from China that benefits Japan. And I guess, they're getting it from Korea too. Now keep in mind, they're only able to do this because they were the ones that said in 1853, I like what you got, Matthew Perry. Come on in, Western Europe. We may not like it, but we're going to take all your cool stuff. Now the Japanese are starting to use that cool Western European stuff to their advantage. And keep in mind, with the Sino-Japanese War, and definitely with the Russo-Japanese War, which we're going to talk about in a second, it's bumping the chest. It's an announcement that says, we have an equal spot at the table as you, Europeans. You got an industrialized army? You think you're awesome? We're awesome too. Okay? So, welcome. We're on the diplomatic stage too. I also want you to keep in mind that in some small sense, the Sino-Japanese War is going to be a cause for the Russo-Japanese War in 1904. So let's talk about how this happens. Okay? Japan, they beat up on Korea. They force the Koreans to undergo, the Korean monarchy, to undergo a series of reforms. Well, this is a good and a bad thing. We're going to see that the Korean monarchy likes the Japanese army a little bit because they help put down peasant rebellions. They help keep the peasants under control. But they also resent the Japanese coming and telling them what to do. So we're going to see really two different sides shape up. The Korean monarchy originally was listening to the Japanese. But when the Japanese start to kind of push them a little too far, the Korean monarchy starts to look to Russia for help. So we have the Korean monarchy that says, maybe we'll go get help from Russia. You have a lot of Korean reformers that want to weaken the monarchy that is looking to Japan. So really it's Koreans and Koreans, but it's one group of Koreans that's having the support of Japan, one group of Koreans that are having the support of Russia. Well, in 1904, this leads to the Russo-Japanese War. And guys, it shouldn't have been a shock, but this is one of the more shocking wars in modern history because it's based on a false perception. It was, you have the Russians, largest army in Europe. Now, look, you got to understand, largest army in Europe, you have a lot of incompetent Borises and Sergeys in there that are going into the meat grinder, okay? So you have the largest army in Europe versus this this Asian group, this Asian country, whatever, okay? It was always the perception that Europeans here, Asians here. But that is a false perspective, because although Japan is obviously Asian, they're wearing the suit of a European. Like, they're doing everything that the Europeans are doing. So it's not Europeans versus Asians. Arguably, it's more Europeans versus European mindset. And in 1904, Japan wipes the floor with Russia. It is a humiliating loss for Russia. And it's the first time it's the first time an Asian entity has defeated a European entity. Okay? All right? And really, a lot of it was due to Japan modernizing their navy now. Japan has become a player. Japan has become the player in Asia. Okay? Now, look, ultimately, Japan will formally annex Korea in 1910. And they won't stop there. See y'all later.